Some truths don't arrive like thunder. They don't demand attention. They whisper. They wait. They unfold slowly in the shadows of your life, beneath the noise, beneath the ache, beneath the questions you've never known how to ask. This is one of them. The person you're searching for, the one you imagine late at night when the silence wraps too tightly around your chest, they're not missing. They're not hiding. They're not late. They're simply not meant to arrive until you stop needing them. It sounds cruel. It sounds backwards. But look closer. You don't attract love by clinging to loneliness. You don't summon the right one by craving completion. As long as your soul is reaching outward to be filled, it cannot shine. It can only echo. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But most people never get that far. They get caught in the loops, in fantasies of rescue, in illusions of romantic salvation. They look for someone to mend what their parents fractured, to affirm what the world has ignored, to rewrite the story their own voice was silenced from telling. And in doing so, they bleed out their power. They turn love into a transaction, a validation, a mirror held by someone else. But real love is not a mirror. It is a presence, and that presence cannot stay where neediness lives. Neediness repels truth. It distorts vision. It begs. It performs. It manipulates without meaning to. And that's why the right one waits. They don't wait on purpose. They're not watching from a distance. But their path does not cross yours until you have walked far enough alone to remember who you are without being chosen. Until you have burned through the masks, the pleasing, the bending. Until you have learned to sit with your own silence without fearing it will consume you. You must become enough. Not in the surface way. Not in the "I'm fine on my own" performative strength. But enough in the soul. Enough in the kind of quiet that no longer bargains with your worth. Enough to stop scanning every room for someone to pick you. And it is only then, in that unexpected stillness, that they appear. Not to rescue you, not to complete you, but to meet you, equal, whole, awake. You may not even recognize them at first because their energy doesn't create fireworks. It creates peace. It settles something inside you instead of igniting a storm. And if you've only known love as chaos, you might mistake that peace for boredom. But that's not boredom. That's safety. And safety is what your soul has been aching for all along. The people who come when you no longer need them are the ones who were never meant to fill your emptiness, but to reflect your fullness. They speak to the part of you that is already healed, already integrated, already come home to itself. That kind of connection cannot be forced. It cannot be summoned by will or timing or effort. It arrives like grace. It arrives when the desperation has died, when the masks have fallen, when the fear of being alone has finally loosened its grip on your throat. And you'll know it by the way it doesn't demand, by the way it doesn't trigger your defenses, by the way it invites you to breathe deeper, speak slower, and be exactly who you are with no need to shrink or perform. Carl Jung believed the goal of life was individuation, the integration of the self. And that includes integrating your capacity to be alone without falling apart, to sit in your own soul and find it good. Until then, every love will feel like hunger. Until then, you won't be choosing, you'll be grasping. But once you cross that unseen threshold, once you stop waiting to be saved, once you choose yourself not as a second option, but as a sacred act, everything shifts. Because suddenly, the love you attract is the love you no longer need to survive. And that kind of love is not addictive. It is expansive. It makes room for your growth. It honors your individuality. It does not consume. It collaborates. So if you are still alone, don't rush to escape it. There is wisdom in the waiting. There is healing in the space between longing and arrival. There are lessons the soul must learn in solitude that no relationship can teach. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. And when you become enough, love arrives, not as a cure, but as a mirror, a witness on the path you no longer fear to walk alone. They only come when you no longer need them. And when they do, you'll finally understand why they couldn't have come sooner. You aren't ready to be seen by someone who wasn't fooled by your masks. You aren't ready to stop pretending. You weren't ready to stay. But now you are. And now they will. Stay tuned. Because everything you've been waiting for might just be waiting for you to return to yourself first. You begin to notice it in the silence. Not the kind that's peaceful, but the kind that echoes. That quiet moment in the middle of your own becoming when you're finally learning how to sit with yourself. Not out of loneliness, but from a kind of sacred solitude that can't be rushed. That's when they return. Not necessarily them, not the exact people who left you in pieces, but versions of them. Faces that remind you of old wounds with new names. Words that feel familiar because they rhyme with the lies you used to believe. It's strange how life works this way. Just when you've managed to crawl out of your pain, just when your feet finally touch the ground without shaking, the test arrives. And it always looks like an opportunity, like closure, like love in a different costume. But you know better now. Something in you, a voice you fought hard to trust, whispers, "Don't fall back into what broke you." That's when the real battle begins. Because healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral, and sometimes it loops back into lessons you thought you had already mastered. Carl Jung once spoke about the return of the repressed, the way the unconscious always circles back when it's not fully integrated. And when those shadows knock, it isn't always with fury. Sometimes they show up with flowers. It's not easy to resist, especially when you're still learning that peace can feel unfamiliar, especially when the nervous system still associates chaos with connection. You start to question yourself. Maybe they've changed. Maybe this is the exception. Maybe I'm being too guarded. But here's the truth. When you no longer need their validation, their attention, their apology, that's when you see them clearly. That's when you stop confusing longing with love. They show up not because they've become what you needed, but because you've become what they always feared. Someone who doesn't require their dysfunction to feel whole. Someone who is no longer seduced by the instability that once felt like home. And in that moment, you are faced with a choice. Not between them and someone else, but between your old self and the one you've been fighting to become. This is the sacred tension. It's the part where you learn that not all returns are meant to be welcomed. That some people only circle back because they feel the energetic shift in you. They sense the detachment, the power, the absence of hunger in your eyes, and that scares them. Because the version of you that begged, that bent, that broke yourself into pieces to make things work, that version is gone. And in its place is someone who understands that wholeness isn't found in someone else's acceptance. It's found in your ability to honor what you feel, to say no without guilt, to choose peace over performance. There's something magnetic about that. People are drawn to healed energy, not because it validates them, but because it confronts them. It holds up a mirror to what they've refused to face. You become a reflection of what they could be if they stopped running from themselves. And that's uncomfortable. That's powerful. That's why they come. But just because they come doesn't mean you have to let them stay. This is where spiritual maturity reveals itself. It's not in your ability to forgive them. It's in your ability to forgive yourself for the times you abandoned your own intuition just to keep someone in your life. And now that you've reclaimed that part of you, the part that knows, you are not available for rehearsals of old pain. You've done the work. You've cried in the middle of the night without anyone to hold you. You've rewritten the story. You've stopped romanticizing potential and started honoring presence. That is not easy. That is holy. And yet the test comes. It always does. Sometimes in the form of a text, a like, a memory that hits too hard, but you breathe, you return to your body, and you remember what it cost you to unlearn the addiction to being needed. Carl Jung believed that what remains unconscious will continue to manifest as fate. But when you bring it into consciousness, when you name it, when you look it in the eye, it loses its power over you. You are not obligated to reopen doors you had the courage to close. There's no need to explain yourself, no need to justify your distance. Your growth is not up for debate, and anyone who truly respects you won't require a performance to receive your presence. The truth is, some connections are karmic. They come to teach, to awaken, to expose. But once the lesson is integrated, the attachment dissolves. What remains is wisdom. And wisdom doesn't chase. You are not cold for moving on. You are not cruel for protecting your peace. You are not heartless for prioritizing your healing. You are human. And for the first time in a long time, you are learning how to live without mistaking pain for love. This isn't the part where you turn back. This is the part where you rise. The irony is, when you finally stop looking for them to come back, they do. But not because they found some divine revelation. Most of the time, it's because they no longer can feed off the part of you that doubted your worth. That part no longer exists. And so they come with the same patterns, same apologies, same promises, dressed in new desperation. But you are no longer the same. And that, my friend, is everything. They always told you that loving yourself was the first step to finding love, but no one ever explained what that really meant. They never told you that loving yourself enough would cost you comfort, would break you away from the ones you once begged to stay, would push you into nights so silent that only your soul could speak. They didn't say that loving yourself wouldn't always feel like love at all. Sometimes it would feel like heartbreak, like grief, like being pulled away from everything you thought you needed. Because it was never about romance, it was about awakening. You don't just wake up one day and realize your worth like flipping a switch. It creeps in, slowly, painfully, like light bleeding through a cracked door. At first, you resist it. You pretend not to see it. You argue with it, because it tells you things you're not ready to hear, that they were never truly for you, that your loneliness was often more peaceful than their chaos, that their love was never home, it was a war zone dressed in the language of passion. And you mistook the battles for proof that something was real. Jung once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their own soul. But you did, and it cost you everything you weren't. Because the truth is, when you start loving yourself, truly, deeply, not performatively, you begin to outgrow people, patterns, and places that once felt like oxygen. You stop chasing the unavailable. You stop explaining your worth. You stop begging for clarity from those who benefit from your confusion. You begin to unlearn what you thought love was: pain. You had mistaken pain for love because it was familiar, because it mirrored wounds you never knew you carried, because your nervous system had been trained to interpret inconsistency as intensity. But love, real love, doesn't have to hurt to feel real. Real love doesn't leave you guessing, doesn't punish your honesty, doesn't disappear when things get difficult. And the moment you start recognizing this, not just intellectually, but somatically, in your body, you begin the sacred act of returning to yourself. You become someone who no longer negotiates their peace, who no longer feels guilty for needing rest, clarity, or distance. You become a quiet revolution against everything that once broke you. That is the moment the healing begins to show, not just in your choices, but in your presence. You no longer flinch when you hear their name. You no longer crave the chaos. You stop scrolling through old messages, stop romanticizing red flags, stop revisiting memories that only ever held you hostage. You sit with your discomfort. You mother your inner child. You walked yourself home. And that kind of self-return changes the shape of your life, not immediately, but gradually, profoundly. You start noticing who actually hears you, who doesn't need to be convinced of your heart, who doesn't shrink from your depth. You begin to attract people who've done their own healing, who speak the same language of wholeness, not because you're finally fixed, but because you've become real, you've become honest. In the eyes of Jung, the journey of individuation, the becoming of the true self, requires a confrontation with the shadow, the wounds, the illusions we call love. And it is in that confrontation that the soul begins to remember its worth. So when you love yourself enough, you don't become harder. You become softer with yourself and firmer with your boundaries. You stop explaining your value to those who only came to extract from you. You stop tolerating the things you once excused in the name of loyalty or hope. You finally understand that love doesn't require your suffering to be valid. You leave rooms that suffocate your spirit. You bless people from a distance who refuse to meet you in truth. You stop chasing what must be chased, and you start gravitating toward what aligns. You no longer confuse chemistry with connection, effort with love, pain with destiny. And in the silence that follows, you begin to hear the voice of God, not as thunder, but as a whisper in your bones, a knowing, a peace, a sacred remembering that you were never meant to earn love through your wounds. You were meant to be love in motion. So if you're still in the middle of the undoing, if you're still learning how to stop settling for pain, how to stop calling chaos love, take this as your sign. You're not behind. You're becoming. You're unlearning. You're reintroducing yourself to the truth of your soul. Because when you love yourself enough, you stop negotiating with what hurts. You no longer ask broken mirrors to reflect your wholeness. You stop apologizing for how much you feel. You stop shrinking to fit into someone else's version of love. You become the love you were searching for. And from that place, you attract not what's loud, but what's real. Not what's shiny, but what's sacred. Not what burns fast, but what builds deep. And when that kind of love finds you, or maybe when you find it in yourself, you'll know. Not because it hurts, but because it heals. So if these words found you, if something inside you softened or broke open as you listened, then maybe it's time. Time to return to yourself. Time to choose love without suffering. Time to build a life where your soul feels safe. And if this resonated, if you felt seen, even just for a moment, then I invite you to subscribe. Not for me, but for you. For the part of you that knows you're meant for more than survival. For the part of you that craves depth, truth, and healing. Because this space, it was created for you, and you're not alone anymore.